Hello boys and girls of grade 6. I am teacher Melinda Hughes, and today for social studies we will continue looking at the family, more specifically the people who came. In our previous lesson we would have examined two of the people who came. One, the Amerindians and the Europeans. In this lesson we will look at the Africans and Portuguese. The Africans and Portuguese. So this is our second lesson based on the family, the people who came. The Africans who came to the Caribbean and Guyana came from the coast of West Africa in the continent of Africa. They were the third ethnic group who came to British Guyana, now Guyana. Some countries that the Africans came from are Congo, Cameroon, Mali, and Gambia. Why were the Africans brought to Guyana? The Africans were brought by the Europeans to Guyana to work on the sugar plantations as slaves. Let's look at the definition for slave. A slave is someone who works very hard without being paid. The system under which the slaves worked and lived was called slavery. They came by ships and had to cross the Atlantic Ocean from the continent of Africa to get to Guyana. The journey from Africa to the Caribbean and Guyana was called the Middle Passage. Yes, the Middle Passage. So there we have a map showing us the journey from Africa to South America, and where the Europeans would have traveled from South America back to Europe, down to Africa, into South America, across the Caribbean Sea, and it continued like that. That is where the Middle Passage occurred. It was a horrifying experience for the slaves, which lasted from 6 to 10 weeks. The journey of the Europeans from Europe to Africa and the Caribbean, and then back to Europe, was called the triangular trade. Why was it called the triangular trade? Because the Europeans traded their goods for slaves across Africa to the Caribbean and then into Guyana. Life on the plantation for the Africans. The home of the Africans was called adobe, and that was made from flimsy materials. The adobe was very low and it had no chimney or ventilation. So the Africans lived under very poor conditions. They were given one iron pot and a blanket for each individual to sleep on at nights. The Africans were given clothing once a year or twice in every 18 months. The women were given some kind of clothing, while those who had young children were given a hammock called baba. The men received a coarse woolen jacket, hat, and canvas which made trousers. So that is what they were accustomed to on the plantation. What was their food like? Their food consisted mainly of vegetables and salted fish. However, whenever plantain, cassava, and yam were grown, that formed a part of the diet for the slaves. There were some difficulties that they faced on the plantations, and those difficulties were they had to work very long hours, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. They were given their first meal at midday, and so up until today it is known as breakfast. They were beaten or flogged with a whip if they did not follow instructions that were given by the planters. Some slaves were even branded with hot iron, hung on wheels, and had parts of their bodies chopped off. So the Africans did face difficulties on the plantation. Now there were different types of slaves. Yes, the slaves were categorized. So there were the factory slave. The factory slave worked in the factory. Then there were the field slaves. The field slaves worked in the cane fields. And then there were the domestic or house slaves. Those were the slaves that worked in the homes of the planters. Due to the harsh punishment, slaves rebelled. Some rebellion or revolt by the slaves were the Berbice Slave Rebellion, which took place on February 23, 1763 on Plantation Magdalenburg, which was led by Coffee. Today, there is a monument that would have been erected in honor of Coffee, and that monument is known as the 1763 Monument. Then there was the East Coast Slave Insurrection, which took place in August 1823 on Plantation Larissa Veneer. So after the slaves rebelled, that led to the abolition of slavery. How did it happen? There was a period of transition called apprenticeship. Apprenticeship lasted for 6 years for field slaves and 4 years for house slaves. During that time, Africans worked for a fixed number of hours each week and received small wages or money. After the apprenticeship period, slaves were emancipated or freed. Slaves were no longer forced to work on the plantation under harsh conditions. Slaves could decide whether to work or not. Ex-slaves pooled their monies or their wages and bought abandoned plantations. The first plantation that slaves bought was Plantation Northbrook, now called Victoria. Ex-slaves also bought the first community, which is found in Essequibo, and that community is called Queenstown. People who started the campaign to end slavery were Thomas Buxton, Thomas Clarkson, Granville Sharp, George Canning, James Ramsey, and William Wilberforce. These were some of the persons who started the campaign to end slavery. And yes, they were successful because slavery was abolished. There are some villages that the ex-slaves bought, and some of those villages are Buxton, Friendship, Peters Hall, Pleasance, Ithaca, and Bushlot, which is found on the Essequibo coast. The Africans contributed to the Guyanese society, and so some of the contributions they made are in the form of food, dress, jewelry, musical instruments, and their festivals and beliefs. So what are some of their foods? Cook-up rice, yam and plantain fufu, conky. Their dress, the shikis, head wraps, head ties. Their jewelry, leg bands, armbands, chains and beads. The musical instruments that the Africans contributed to the Guyanese society are drums. For example, bongos, kittles, and the great talking drums. The marimbas, the maracas. Festivals and beliefs. They believed in comfort, masquerade, obia, and voodoo. Of course, up until today, some of these beliefs are carried forward and practiced by Africans. So boys and girls, this has brought us to the end of our lesson on the Africans. Next, we will examine the Portuguese. The Portuguese. The Portuguese were the fourth group of people who came to Guyana. The Portuguese came from Madeira. The first batch of Portuguese came to Guyana on May 3, 1835. The name of the ship that the first batch of Portuguese arrived on was the Louisa Bailey. The Portuguese worked on the plantation under the system called indentureship. They were the first group of indentured immigrants to arrive in Guyana. Indentureship lasted for a period of 5 years. After the 5 years were over, many of the Portuguese left the plantations and opened businesses, example groceries. They also did small-scale trading. But how did the Portuguese arrive in Guyana? They arrived here because the Europeans brought them to replace the Africans on the sugar plantations since slavery was abolished. They were also brought by the Europeans to increase the white population. So those are the reasons why the Portuguese were brought to Guyana. Some plantations where the Portuguese were sent are Plantation La Penitence, Plantation Liliendal, Plantation Thomas, now known as Thomas Lands in Georgetown. The Portuguese contributed to the Guyanese society just like the other ethnic groups. What food did they contribute? Yes, garlic pork, beef stew, red bean soup, and pancakes. What were some of the musical instruments that they contributed to the Guyanese society? Rajas, a type of banjo, and brags, a small Portuguese guitar. The Portuguese had customs and beliefs that were contributed to the Guyanese society. Two of the main ones are the belief in the Holy Spirit of Pentecost and Christmas. The Portuguese would have started business places, and so some of those businesses exist up until today. J.P. Santos, of course, that doesn't exist anymore, but we have Banks DIH, we have John Finance, and Fogarty's Limited. So boys and girls, this has brought us to the end of our study on the Portuguese, and so we have a little quiz to do. A quiz that is based on information that you were given on the Africans and Portuguese. So question 1. On which plantation did the 1763 Berbice Slave Rebellion take place? On which plantation did the 1763 Berbice Slave Rebellion take place? And so the answers are there on the screen. I am sure you would have chosen D, Plantation Magdalenburg. Yes, that's the plantation on which the 1763 Berbice Slave Rebellion took place. Question 2. The first plantation bought by the Africans was? The first plantation bought by the Africans was? And so yes, if you had chosen D, Plantation Northbrook, that's correct. Of course, Plantation Northbrook was renamed Victoria. So boys and girls, I am sure you have that information to the tip of your fingers. Next question. Which of the following is not associated with traditional African beliefs? Which of the following is not associated with traditional African beliefs? I am sure, boys and girls, you would have chosen A, Bush Dai Dai. Bush Dai Dai. Yes, the Bush Dai Dai is not associated with the Africans' traditional beliefs. That is associated with the Amerindians. Our next question. What did most of the Portuguese do after indentureship? What did most of the Portuguese do after indentureship? So I am sure you would have chosen B. they opened their own businesses. Yes, the Portuguese opened their own business places after the period of indentureship ended. And our last question for this section is, which of the following is not a plantation that Portuguese were sent to? Which of the following is not a plantation that the Portuguese were sent to? I am sure you would have chosen plantation Vredenhoop. Yes, plantation Vredenhoop at D is correct. The Portuguese were not sent to plantation Vredenhoop to work. They were sent to plantation Thomas, plantation Le Penitence, and plantation Liliendahl. So boys and girls, this has brought us to the end of our lesson on the Africans and Portuguese. I am sure you are happy with the quiz and the information that you have been given. Do stay safe, and I'll see you next time, boys and girls, as we continue with our final two ethnic groups.